By most measures, the iPhone was one of the most important and consequential inventions of the early 21st century. It redefined an entire product category, launched the app economy, changed human behavior, disrupted multiple industries, and accelerated mobile internet adaptation. Regardless of how you feel about Apple today, the first iPhone was one of the main reasons modern life looks the way it does. And it all started in the mid-2000s. Steve Jobs was getting frustrated with his phone. He felt that his Motorola phone was plain terrible. He was also worried that Microsoft was developing a phone that could undercut the iPod. All of that growing frustration and worries about Microsoft led to his decision around 2004 and 2005 that Apple should build its own phone. Though interestingly, the iPhone grew out of two separate internal projects. One team was working on a tablet that would eventually become the iPad, while the other one was exploring whether a touchscreen could work on a much smaller device. So Jobs decided to shrink the tablet concept down and redirect resources toward the phone, and started their secret development project called Project Purple. Despite the funny name, the iPhone was developed under extreme secrecy. A whole floor of Apple's building was locked down for this specific purpose alone. All employees working on the new phone couldn't even tell their families what they were doing. For all their families knew, they could have been working on a secret government mission. That was the level of secrecy during the development of the first iPhone. And it lasted for 2.5 years and costed an estimate of $150 million to develop it. It sounds like an absurd amount of money, but look at it this way. They had to solve multiple challenges that either nobody has solved before or solved poorly. For example, multi-touch screens had already existed, but making a touchscreen that was accurate and responsive enough for a phone was enormously difficult. Apple had to develop software to interpret touch inputs and started working with a supplier. Then there was the OS issue. Jobs didn't want to build a new simple phone OS from scratch, so he insisted on running a real, fully operating system. Engineers had to adapt macOS X to run on a tiny, low-power chip, which was a challenge and a half, and running a powerful OS on a small battery was also a major engineering challenge. And then there was the form factor. Jobs famously demanded the screen to be scratch-resistant glass, not plastic, which led to a rushed partnership with Corning to produce what became the famous Gorilla Glass. And finally, Jobs had to make a deal with carriers. He struck a groundbreaking deal with AT&T, which gave Apple unprecedented control over the device and software, which was unheard of in the carrier-dominated mobile industry at that time. All of those challenges required meticulous planning and hard work from every employee, hence the secrecy. But after 2.5 years, on January 9, 2007, Jobs walked onto the Macworld stage and introduced the iPhone with one of the most celebrated product reveals in history. He framed it as Apple introducing three revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator, and then revealed that they were all one device. The iPhone went on sale on June 29, 2007, with people lining up around the block at Apple stores, and that makes sense. To understand how dramatic the shift was, you have to picture what phones were like before the iPhone. Smartphones did exist. BlackBerry, Nokia, Palm, and Windows Mobile all had smartphones, but in comparison to the iPhone, they looked like underdeveloped tech demos. For example, physical keyboards were considered the standard. The assumption in the industry was that people needed physical buttons to type. Then there were styluses. If you've ever used an old-gen stylus, I bet you remember how uncomfortable and clunky they felt. The interfaces themselves were built around the hardware, so even the basic things like menus were complicated, and using the internet on a phone was slow and painful. And remember the deal that Jobs struck with carriers? Well, that was important because before that, phone manufacturers largely did what carriers told them, including what software could be on the device. And to top it all off, the devices were fragmented in what they did best. BlackBerry, for example, was great for email. iPods were great for music, and cameras were an afterthought in general. So when Apple started working on their phone, they decided to throw everything out and start over with a different mindset. Jobs made the decision to remove all physical buttons except one, the home button, and make the entire face of the phone a screen. That was, well, a huge gamble. Every competitor in industry analysis thought people would hate it, but the idea was genius. A software keyboard would only appear when needed, freeing the entire screen for whatever you were doing. On top of that, it could be improved with future updates. That made Steve's idea for a real internet experience possible, which he specifically stated. This was a direct shot at every other phone at the time. For people who had tried browsing on other phones, the ability to view a fully rendered desktop version alone was mind-blowing and convenient. Things that we take for granted today, like the pinch to zoom function, had never been seen before the first iPhone was released. Apple made it feel completely natural, and the physics of scrolling made it extremely satisfying. And since the iPhone ran a real OS, its capabilities weren't fixed in manufacturing. Apple could push updates that fundamentally changed what the device could do. And more importantly, the iPhone didn't just do one or two things well, but it actually did everything in one convenient system. Music, phone calls, voicemails, emails, the internet, maps, and a camera all live together in one phone. Interestingly, Nokia, which dominated global phone sales at the time, was skeptical and dismissive. But the funny thing is that they had actually developed touchscreen concepts years earlier, but shelved them because they believed that the market wasn't ready. While in reality, the iPhone was going to disrupt multiple industries. It essentially wiped out point-and-shoot cameras. For example, Kodak, which was already struggling, filed for bankruptcy in 2012. The GPS devices market also took a massive hit. Garmin's market cap dropped by roughly 85% between 2007 and 2009, as Google Maps and Apple Maps took over for the most people. The print advertising also saw an acceleration of the collapse because, well, mobile internet was becoming a huge thing thanks to Apple. Then you have banking, retail, alarm clocks, flashlights, calculators, and even healthcare, which all took a hit. Apple itself wasn't safe from their invention either. After the release of the iPhone, the iPod was cannibalized almost immediately. Standalone MP3 players became almost obsolete within a few years. Though, funny enough, streaming on mobile devices fundamentally changed how and when people consume video, which enabled Netflix to eventually dismantle the traditional cable industry. And another thing that we take for granted is the app ecosystem. Back when the first iPhone was released, Jobs believed that third-party developers should build web apps and not native ones. But as it always happens, almost immediately a hacker community began jailbreaking iPhones to install unauthorized apps. The demand was huge and undeniable, which meant that users did in fact want more software than what the web apps could deliver. So in March 2008, Apple released the iPhone Development Kit, and in July 2008, a day before the iPhone 3G launched, the App Store opened with 500 apps. In the first weekend alone, it had 10 million downloads, and it created the app economy. Developers could reach millions of users through a single store. Apple took a 30% cut of paid app revenue and curated the store, while users got a trusted and curated place to discover apps. It also created a new business model. Today, when you look at apps on the App Store, a lot of them have in-app purchases and subscriptions. That was and still is very lucrative for developers. On top of that, it was a self-reinforcing loop. More users attracted more developers. More developers created more apps that attracted more users. It was perfect. And within a few years, the App Store had hundreds of thousands of apps and had paid out billions to its developers. It created whole new categories of businesses. Mobile gaming, the gig economy like Uber and DoorDash, and even social media as we know it. All of that led to accelerated mobile internet adoption. Prior to 2007, mobile internet existed, yes, but it was largely a miserable experience. If you were around at that time, you probably remember how painful it was just to open a website on your phone, and that was if it could even do this. Tiny screens, slow speeds, websites designed for desktop that rendered as an unusable mess, it was horrible. But Apple introduced something different, a real browser in your pocket. Safari on the original iPhone rendered full desktop sites, and not their watered-down versions. For the first time, the mobile internet was the actual internet. The touchscreen made it intuitive in ways that made you want to throw out your stylus out the window. And at the same time, it created enormous pressure on the government and carriers to invest in mobile infrastructure. The almost literal explosion in data usage made AT&T famously crumble under iPhone traffic in early years. It made 3G expansion urgent and accelerated the push toward 4G LTE, which launched around 2010 and 2012 and made the mobile internet we know today possible. But it wasn't just the carriers that had to adapt. The surge in mobile browsing forced the entire web development industry to start rethinking their designs. Even Google began factoring mobile friendliness into search rankings. Everything we love and hate about the internet can be traced back back to the release of the first iPhone. What started as a personal frustration with the Motorola phone ended up forcing Steve Jobs to make a decision that would shape the lives of billions of people. 2.5 years of secrecy, and $150 million later, the device that was going to change the world forever was revealed. And the rest is history.
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not three separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.